came out about his experiences as an embedded journalist with the battle company in Afghanistan. I wanted to reference a film, since we are talking about Restrepo. The Hurt Locker opened with a quotation referencing Chris Hedges' work, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, that the rush of battle is a potent and often lethal addiction, for war is a drug. And I've seen your work compared to Michael Hare's embed stuff in Vietnam, but I think that what you did with war is much more in vein with the idea of the manic thrill of going to battle for young men. And I wanted to know what you thought about that, and if you could speak on that, because it's very surprising and a bit off-putting for a civilian to see.
I think society has to understand and reconcile itself with the fact that there is something about combat that is certainly something that tests young men, and young men like that test. They like it. They don't flee from it, they like it, and often will return to it over and over again. I think adrenaline is a very important component of that. It's not the only component. I think in some ways a more profound part of that reaction is the brotherhood that exists in combat. You can get adrenaline elsewhere. You can skydive, you can drive too fast without a seatbelt, whatever it is. You can act in ways that scare you, and if that's your addiction, you can get that in society. What you cannot get is brotherhood. One guy in the platoon said to me, you know, there's guys in the platoon who straight up hate each other, but we would all die for each other. For a 19-year-old who otherwise in society might be kind of lost, you know, the bottom of the food chain socially, to be in a relationship like that with 20 or 30 other men is very profound, and it's psychologically and emotionally very safe. It's very reassuring, and I think that's one of the things that that is, I hate to use the word appealing, but that's one of the things that's appealing about combat.
And I think it also helps explain why there's such a drastic discomfort returning home and trying to maintain normalcy when you go from being at 10 every single day to going back to that normal life. I wanted to talk to you about how you ended up in the Korengal. You were there on an assignment for Vanity Fair,
That's right.
Which you had done earlier, I believe, dispatches for some sort of sketch on war, much earlier, I think in like 2000.
Well, I've been covering wars since 1993.
Yes.
And
so how did you end up in the Korengal and with Tim Hetherington? Was it together, and you know, did you go coming with just the idea of doing dispatches for Vanity Fair, or did you have a narrative arc in your head that you wanted to make this into a book?
I proposed to Vanity Fair that I do a couple of assignments for them, and do multiple trips with one platoon. And what I really wanted to do was write a book and make a documentary. I made my first trip in June '07. I shot all the footage on that trip. And in the next trip, in September '07, I was fortunate enough to team up with Tim. And he started shooting as well. And we alternated trips for a while. We each did 5 one-month trips. But my idea, starting in 2005, was to write a book about a platoon, do a documentary about a platoon, and basically I would pay for it by doing articles for Vanity Fair.
So did the story arc then of both the documentary and war come about organically, or did you really have a storyboard that you were working with when you were over there?
No, there was no storyboard. We didn't know what would happen. So our idea was to just shoot as much as possible, and we got a sense of which characters we wanted to sort of develop. No, we were reactive, not proactive. And
did the idea of partnering sort of a visual medium with the written word, did you feel like you lost your voice at all in that? Was that either a liberating or a painful?
There were 2 different projects. You know, the book satisfied all my needs to explore the ideas and the thoughts that I had about this story. The movie was a way to tell the same story with a completely different medium, have a very different impact, to give, obviously, a visual experience for people.
I had read an interview with Hetherington recently in the New York Times about how he hoped that Restrepo would challenge people. And I had gone in, I saw the film in the press screening, and I had gone in really trying to brace myself. And I was surprised how much I laughed during the movie. It's a wide roller coaster of emotions that you're viewing with the troops themselves. And were you hoping that the film would challenge people? What surprised you during your embed over there?
I mean, there's a lot of laughter because there's a lot of laughter in small outposts. I mean, you get guys that are stuck alone up there on a hilltop. They make each other laugh because they need to. We didn't ask ourselves the question, would it challenge people? What I wanted to do was show what it's like, give viewers the experience of being in combat. To show what it's like to be a soldier in combat. Is that challenging? I don't know. We didn't think of it that way, but we did realize we were doing something very different from what most journalists do. Most journalists attempt some kind of strategic or political evaluation of the overall war. Soldiers don't think that way. We were trying to capture the experience of soldiers, so we didn't put that in the movie.
I mean, I felt that was very satisfying for me, that I was seeing individuals and not stereotypes or tropes of this, you know, formulated, stereotypical macho poor guy that's, you know, signed up for the army because he didn't have any other options. You have very intelligent, passionate people that are there, and I appreciate that you were seeing individuals and faces. Restrepo itself is very distinct because from other documentaries in the fact that there are no real narrative arcs, there's no specialists that you're cutting away to or experts explaining anything. It's very much as it happens. You don't have high echelon ranking officials explaining what's going on. Did you have that intention from the beginning, or?
Our idea was to show what it's like to be a soldier, so we couldn't have anything in the movie that was outside the soldier's experience. You know, if soldiers had the opportunity to ask generals, you know, why they were in the Korengal Valley, we might have sought out an explanation from a general. But they couldn't, so we didn't. There was no outside narration because there was no narration in the Korengal. I mean, there was no voice booming down explaining things, so we couldn't have that in the movie.
Yeah, very true. Restrepo has a sort of a footnote, which is that we pulled out of the Korengal Valley very recently after more than 40 people died in combat there, and OP Restrepo was summarily demolished. What are we supposed to make from that at the end of the film, and how are the men themselves that fought there dealing with that?
The men of the platoon who communicated their feelings to me were all pretty upset. They fought very hard there, they lost good friends, and then the U.S. pulled out. I think on a more intellectual level, I mean, they're soldiers, and they understand that a 20-man outpost in the Hindu Kush Mountains is probably not going to be occupied by American forces forever. They get that. That's war, you know. I mean, the battlefield changes. It's like a chessboard, you know. The battlefield changes. The other side reacts to what you're doing. You react to their reaction, and things change. And suddenly, a valley that was very important at one point is not anymore, or it was never important, and it took a few years for one or the other side to realize it. And so it's hard to know, but that's what happens in war. You know, Gettysburg, it's a farm. It was a farm of no consequence, you know.
Well, it reminded me very much, actually, of the film Paths of Glory, where it's this mythic obsession almost with a stretch of terrain, you know, taking Ant Hill, taking Bunker Hill, taking Gettysburg, and then, you know, at the end of the day, it's still just a stretch of land. But it still has taken on this sort of magical meaning to these men, and, you know, I would imagine it would be very hard to cope with seeing it bulldozed.
Usually, men fight over terrain not because the terrain's important. It's the fighting. It isn't the terrain that gives the fighting importance. The fighting gives the terrain importance. In most cases, it's just some hilltop. Once in a while, there's a really strategic location that has an obvious importance, but most of the time, it's not true.
Was it aggravating for you, who, you know, you've personally been there for so long, and then, you know, you assume there's some strategic value to it, and then the U.S. just rather ambiguously pulls out?
I mean, I've covered so many wars, I sort of get it. Like, armies end up fighting where they meet each other. You know, like, it's not. I didn't have that expectation really. But I didn't lose anyone that I knew very well. I mean, I knew guys who got killed there, but I didn't lose a best friend. I think that would be harder.
Well, I had read in your op-ed, too, that one of the reasons that they had originally put the base there was because the Pesh Valley was considered of strategic importance and very vulnerable. And you had noted that that casualties and attacks had gone down when Korengal was established. Do you know by any chance if they've gone back up since?
Well, now the road has been paved in the Pesh, so the convoys can go really fast, and they're very hard to attack. So it may have served its purpose. I mean, I don't know. You know, they just pulled out a few months ago, so I don't know. But you know, in a weird way, it may have served its purpose.
I also just wanted to talk about the disconnect between sort of people we're seeing in the film, the infantry fighters, and sort of the higher echelons of leadership. And you hinted at it in a very quiet way at some point in Restrepo. High-ranking general comes to see the base. He's flown in. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and then he just very quietly leaves again. Life goes back to normal. When you're having infantry that is dealing with combat every single day on a 15-month deployment, and very few of their leadership has experienced this, is there any tension because of this? Does it affect the way we fight or the men view things?
They don't expect the command to be in combat. I mean, it's not their job. You
or
know?
at least to draw on that experience, to at least be able to sympathize. I know there's been a lot of tension with the fact that, you know, we can't use firepower when they feel that firepower should be being used right now.
It's really complicated. I never heard the soldiers complain that there were no commanding officers at Restrepo. I mean, one time Colonel Austin came up there, and you know, it was kind of miserable for everybody because everyone had to get real uptight until he left. Yeah. And they liked him. They liked him, but they didn't want him there. You know, I think Austin understood the tactical problems they were facing, and you know, those decisions get made at a really high level. And they also understood that, like, if they kill civilians, they die. Yeah. The civilians will help the Taliban, will not pass along intelligence to them, and they'll get killed. So even without the ROE, rules of engagement, they were really careful about it because I think they understood the consequences of being too cavalier.
Yeah, of course. The last thing I just wanted to mention was, for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, it's been frustrating and aggravating knowing that Afghanistan as a topic has been sidelined from the national dialogue for the past 9 years, and you know, it's been deteriorating there. And now, all of a sudden, there's sort of a maelstrom of attention, which I think is a positive thing. And what would you like Restrepo and War to contribute to that dialogue?
I mean, we're having a big national conversation about Afghanistan, and I think, I mean, strategic decisions should not be made based on the experiences of soldiers. Like, that's not, it shouldn't work that way. But I think in terms of the civilian population, it really helps to understand what these guys go through, because when they come home, if we have an understanding, it'll be easier to understand the men themselves and to give them a place in society. And as long as if we don't understand what they went through, we will project our ideas onto it, and that starts to become problematic.
Thank you so much, Mr. Junger. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.